Okay, so this next story here is absolutely terrifying here. You can see here millions have lost their insurance during this pandemic-driven recession here. A new study finds that an estimated 5 million American workers have lost their insurance during this pandemic here. The coronavirus pandemic has stripped an estimated 5.4 million American workers of their health insurance between February and May. February and May, so not even including June, not including halfway through July, which we're halfway through right now. No, only February and May, and it's already, as you can see right here, the study announced to be today on Tuesday, found that an estimated increase in uninsured workers from February to May was nearly 40% higher than the previous increase, which occurred during the Great Recession of 2008 to 2009, when 3.9 million lost their insurance. Guys, you just heard that, right? You just heard that. Between February and May, 40% more people lost their insurance than during the entire Great Recession. The entire Great Recession. I mean, you could argue that this makes it, in fact, a number of economic data points have already indicated this, that this economic downturn is significantly worse already than the Great Recession. It's the worst economic downturn since World War II. And also, by the way, you could even make the case that when we're talking about losing your insurance, you could at least make the case, look, obviously losing your insurance at any point is obviously terrible, but you could make the case that losing your insurance during a pandemic is arguably worse than losing it just during the Great Recession when there wasn't a pandemic going around. This is a disaster. This is mind-bogglingly bad. And I'm going to show you another study from the Urban Institute showing you some of the projections projecting how bad they think it's going to get going into, the end of the year. So this is absolutely disaster. Guys, at the beginning of this thing, I actually did have a little bit of optimism. I had a little bit of optimism, just a tiny little spark of optimism that maybe, just maybe, Republicans and Democrats could buck their orthodoxy a little bit, could buck those sort of biases, those previously held ideas that they had, that maybe, just maybe, they could come together for a new kind of solution. Now, I was skeptical. You can watch my videos at the time from like 2-3 months ago. I was skeptical. I was very, very skeptical, but I did think that maybe, just maybe, at least one good thing would come out of it. That one thing for workers would come out. But clearly, that little spark of optimism that I had was absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. Because what we're seeing right now is Republicans, their only solution, and I'm going to show you all some articles talking about this and give you a little bit more facts into this in just a second. But Republicans right now, their only solution is, oh, well, we have to reopen the economy. We have to get workers going back to work. And yeah, at the end of the day, like in some sense, yeah, like if you want to get the economy back up, the only way to do that is to reopen the economy. At some point, obviously, yeah. But it's becoming increasingly clear that that is the only thing that Republicans have, right? Donald Trump, for instance, is saying that he wants to have an infrastructure package of a couple $1 trillion and invest in infrastructure to redo this. But Mitch McConnell says, no, we're going to block that. We're not going to let that thing happen, which, by the way, the infrastructure thing was like the only thing that I've ever really said, like, oh, yeah, that's actually like a good policy idea in terms of Donald Trump. And Democrats have said, okay, look, Donald Trump, if you want to do the infrastructure package and that's all we're doing, we're talking a few $1 trillion to invest in infrastructure, some, bridges, roads, etc. Like Democrats have said, we're on board with that. We'll do that. But Mitch McConnell and, GOP leaders in Congress have said we're not going to be doing that one thing. That, like, the one good thing that Donald Trump says he's in favor of, Republicans in Congress are stopping him from doing that thing. So, this is a disaster right now. The Republicans in Congress are not willing at all, to buck their ideas, to buck their solutions that they've always had. I'm going to show you all this in just a second, so maybe I don't want to get ahead of myself, but Betsy DeVos, for instance, is running around talking about how we have to reopen schools, and that's the only solution that she has for this thing. It's a disaster. Now, I said I was going to show you all a study from the Urban Institute. So this here, you can see here, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, but the study is with the Urban Institute here. In fact, this is actually the study itself. You can see there, the Urban Institute, finding that more than 10 million people are estimated to lose their employer-sponsored health insurance as a result of pandemic-related job losses in their household between April and December of 2020. So this is using projections data to estimate for us how bad this thing is going to get. 10.1 million people are projected to lose their insurance through the course of the end of the year. Now, we'll have to see. Obviously, projections are just that. They're projections, they're estimates, they're sort of guesstimates, but that is not at all good. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that every single one of those people are going to remain uninsured, because there's different kinds of programs to help with that. But it still is very suggestive here. So you can see here, because they also crunch those numbers here. This one here at the bottom, projections show that 3.3 million of those people will regain employer-sponsored insurance by being added to a family member's policy. 2.8 million people will enroll in Medicaid, and 600,000 people will enroll in the individual market, mainly via Affordable Care Act's marketplace. Still, an estimated 3.5 million people will remain uninsured. Guys, 3.5 million people extra on top of that are going to remain uninsured. That's almost as bad as the 3.9 million people who just lost their insurance during the Great Recession. Because you got to remember, again, obviously, you lose your insurance. It doesn't mean that you stay uninsured. A lot of people have other kinds of options that they can go to. Some people are eligible for the various kinds of states expansions or COBRA, et cetera, et cetera. But it still goes to show you 3.5 million people are going to remain uninsured during the pandemic thing. Because by the way, it's, guys, end of 2020 December, we like to think, oh, well, everything with this coronavirus thing is going to be wrapped up by then. Not necessarily, man. Not necessarily. It's possibly going to go into 2021 as well, especially the first half of 2021 as well. So this is a true disaster. I mean, this is a disaster the likes of which I have never seen in my entire life. Now, it is true that, for instance, while 4 out of 5 people who do lose their insurance will be eligible for some kind of coverage in Medicaid expansion, you might be hearing those numbers and be a little bit skeptical, because it is true that 4 out of 5 people will be eligible for some kind of expansion or some kind of Medicaid expansion. It's also the case that a lot of people can't afford some of those premiums related to the various kinds of packages. And also, there's a lot of people out there who don't actually know that they're eligible, or if they might know that they're eligible or figure out that they're eligible, they don't know how to actually access those programs. Guys, this is why Medicare for All is so important, and why I was such a vocal advocate of Medicare for All during the primaries, and indeed still am a vocal advocate for Medicare for All. Because this is the kind of disaster that we want to avoid. This is the kind of disaster that is unacceptable for any kind of civilized country, any kind of civilized society. This is a disaster. Even the idea of having to pay medical bills, right? Like, you get sick and then you have to pay medical bills. There's something deeply wrong about that. There's something deeply corrupting about that. And we have to confront that head on. And the best way to do that, of course, is with a Medicare for All like program, right? We have to be fighting for universal coverage where nobody has to pay out of pocket. None of that. None of that nightmare, none of that disaster. You can't have people going bankrupt during a coronavirus pandemic, or any kind of pandemic, obviously, or anytime, ever. If someone gets in a car crash, you shouldn't have to go bankrupt over something like that. It's completely wrong. I mean, that's just the basis. That's the basic decency of a good society, that we wouldn't allow something like this. But guys, I have even more bad news for you. If you thought that was the end of the bad news, you are, sadly, you are mistaken. I have even more bad news for you here. 32% of U.S. households missed their July housing payments. 32%. Guys, do you even think about 1 in 3 Americans couldn't make their payments to their house of renters. 1 out of 3 people in this entire country couldn't make their payments. And by the way, guys, we were already having an evictions crisis for renters before this thing hit. When we were in the supposed good times, when the economy was skyrocketing, when the stock markets were blowing up, we were still having an evictions crisis where the evictions for renters were worse than the evictions of homeowners during the Great Recession. Yeah, you heard that right. I'm going to say it one more time because it's insane. It's insane. More people were getting evicted. 2 million people were getting evicted during the good times. They were renters though, so they weren't homeowners, but they were renters during the good times. More people being evicted before this whole thing got started than were being evicted during the Great Recession, during the homeowners crisis of the Great Recession. I mean, this is a disaster. It was already a disaster. The whole economy, everything. House of cards. Just a complete house of cards. All it took was one measly little virus that you can't even see. And that's all it took. And boom, everything's falling apart. Everything is just falling apart. The entire economy was just a house of cards. Still is clearly a house of cards. And we're still watching it tumbling down. Now, there was that evictions freeze, and there has been a number of subsidies and a number of kind of programs to help sort of stopgap a lot of this stuff, but a lot of that stuff is expiring. And guess what, guys? Guess what? This is where my sort of naive spark of optimism, thinking that there was going to be a bucking of the orthodoxies, is just absolutely wrong. A lot of that stuff is set to expire. A lot of that stuff is set to expire at the end of July. A lot of the housing assistance programs are set to expire at the end of July. Just imagine how bad August is going to be if we're already talking about 1 out of 3 Americans not being able to make their housing payments in July with all that help, with all that money that they're sending over. Now, of course, most of the money went up to the top, and that's the problem. That's the problem. But there was quite a bit of money still coming up to, homeowners, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what happens when all that stuff goes away? I'll tell you what. It's a disaster. I'll tell you that. It's a disaster. You think the uprisings are bad right now? You think people are mad right now? Man, just you wait till all the assistance goes away, because what are Republicans trying to do? Instead of actually trying to redistribute money to help working families and help working people, they're just like reopen, reopen, reopen. They want the economy to reopen immediately, just how it was, just V curve, as Donald Trump says. And look, some of the stuff is already starting to rebound. It is. It is. But, obviously, you completely shut it down, so you have a few people start working, so it looks like it's coming up in a V, but that doesn't mean that we can just completely reopen, because you know what else is coming up in a V? The coronavirus numbers. The coronavirus numbers. We're in a worse situation right now in terms of coronavirus cases than we were back in April and in March when we were shutting everything down. Right now, we're having this debate. In fact, actually, I was going to save this for a few minutes from now, but I'll just show you all now. Betsy DeVos, as you all know, and Donald Trump running around trying to reopen schools for the fall, putting all kinds of pressure to reopen schools. Guys, right now, the cases are in a worse situation than they were when we shut down the schools. So why was it so bad that we had to this is something I would ask them is, well, okay, why did you think that it was so bad we had to shut down the schools back in March and April if right now the cases are worse, but right now, time to reopen, time to reopen, time to reopen. I'll tell you why. It's because the election is getting closer. November is getting closer. It's tick-tock, 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 and November is approaching quickly. And Donald Trump knows. Donald Trump is worried that if the economy is still in a bad shape by the time the election comes around, by the time the election rolls around, guess what they're going to do? They're going to vote him out. And Republicans are worried about that. You look at the poll numbers right now, it is a disaster, an absolute disaster for Republicans right now. I just made a video about it yesterday. You can go watch that video right now. But we're talking about Texas. Texas being a swing state right now. Texas, a swing state. Man, Republicans are in a lot of trouble right now. But you know what? You know what, though? Republicans think, it's because the economy's bad. If we just reopen the economy, and of course, the only way that they know how to do that is if we just get the economy going, well, the only way they know to get the economy going is just to reopen the economy and not actually redistribute wealth to help people. I'll tell you what, though, that's the problem. That's the problem. They think, well, if we just get the economy back, if we just reopen everything, then everything's going to be better and people will go out and vote for me. Guys, that's the very problem, that mindset. If they had the thought that, if I redistributed wealth, if I implemented programs, implemented policies that would help the working class, help people make it through this struggling time, you know what? Then they actually might have a shot. Then they actually might have a shot in November. If Republicans were to say, you know what? Okay, we believed in tax cuts. We believed in all this other garbage, what I would call garbage, back then when things were great. But right now, it's a time to try new things. If they said Medicare for all, infrastructure investment, they said we're going to be redistributing immense amounts of money down to the bottom 50%. Then you know what? I actually do think that Republicans would have a shot. I actually do think that if they did that, they would have a shot coming in November. But they were too inflexible. They couldn't change their views. They couldn't change their ideology because their ideology was too focused on tax cuts. Their ideology was too focused on helping corporations, too focused on helping the rich. They were more interested in getting the stock market back up than they were about getting Main Street back up. It was more about Wall Street than about Main Street, and that's their downfall. That's why they're coming down. Okay, so don't get it twisted, guys. Don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted here. It's not just, the economy was bad and so people are going to go in and vote them out. No, it's the fact that they couldn't do anything about it. It's because Trump looks so incompetent. The only thing that he can do is talk about the stock market. The only thing that he can do is talk about, getting people back to work. He's not actually talking about paying people to stay home. Because what are schools for the Republicans right now? Clearly, schools right now are just a warehouse. They're just a warehouse for children so that workers can go back to work. That's why reopening the schools is such a big debate. It's not like the Democrats are out there suddenly opposing education. When, by the way, guys, the Democrats have always been the ones who are fighting for more education spending. Not as much as I would like. They don't go as far as much as I would like, but Republicans out there trying to cut education spending. So don't get it twisted here. It's not like suddenly the Democrats oppose education and the Republicans are in favor of education. That's not what's going on here. It's that the Republicans want to get you back to work without safety precautions. They want to get you back to work, and the best way to do that, the only way that, or one of the major steps that they need to do if they want to get people back to work, is get people back in schools. Get people back in schools. And that's the only reason why we're even having this conversation at all. Last thing I'll just show you here, Florida, in a terrible situation right now. Trump aides undercut Fauci as he raises alarm. Florida sets single-day U.S. record with 15,000 new cases. Guys, we're hitting record numbers for coronavirus. I know I mentioned it earlier and I got my order out a little bit, and I mixed up my order a little bit here. But guys, 15,000 cases in one day in Florida. Florida, as you all know, having a high elderly population. This is a disaster. This is a nightmare for Republicans right now. Man, I'll tell you what. It's a bad situation right now. It's a bad situation. And again, we're not seeing anyone, even Democrats right now. I mean, most of this video I've been criticizing Republicans, but even Democrats, especially Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, not being willing to actually push the envelope, push things forward and say, you know what, I didn't support Medicare for all in the past, but now I do. Joe Biden still running around saying that he opposes Medicare for all. He can't even, guys, he can't even come out and say, look, I support a temporary Medicare for all, right? Like, he can't even do that, because that I would be like, okay, well, all right. I mean, I don't agree with you. I think that, getting in a car crash and losing, and going bankrupt is also terrible, right? That's my view. I think we can all agree on that, right? But if he came out and said, look, things are so bad right now, Medicare for all for the next 2 years, okay? I'd be like, all right, well, at least there's something. Give Americans a free trial. This would what I would say. I'd say, look, well, at least you're giving Americans a free trial and we can see if you like it, because I'll bet you that we're going to like it. All right, that's the video, you all. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.